Now let's look into indexing. Indexing is supported by string, list, and tuple. Dictionary and set does not support indexing. Indexing refers to property of a container to order its element by assigning it an index. This is governed by position. So index lets user access element of a container by its location, starting with 0. So index of first element is always 0 and the last element is n minus 1, where n is the number of elements in the container, or in other words we can say length of the container minus 1. So we've already seen that when we were working on the data types. Let's have a quick recap. So suppose we have a string 1, and we are storing hello as the value. If we want to access the first element, then the index would be 0. So when we'll say string 1, then square bracket 0, it is going to give us element first, which would be capital H. If we want to access the last element, which is O, then we have to simply say total length, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, minus 1, which would be 4. So let's first see what gets printed when we are providing index to be 0. So we are getting H. Now if we have to access O, then we have to simply go to the last element, which would be total length minus 1, which is 4. So as you can see, O is printed. Similarly, we can do the same for list and tuple by accessing their respective elements using square brackets and the index. There is one important thing we should note here. We can also provide a negative value. That means start counting from the backwards. So suppose we want to start counting from backwards. So that means total length is 5. And now we want to start counting from the backwards. So minus 1. We'll get O. Now we don't need to write. So this 5 here indicates the total length. Correct? So just like if there's a question that if O is the last element from left, then of course it would be the first element from the right. Correct? So if we will assign the sign minus, then rather than counting from the left, Python will start counting it from the right. So it makes things easier if you just want to access it from the last. Now let's take another example. Rather than minus 1, if we will say 2, then it will take the second element from the right, which would be L. Let's print it. You'll get L. Now if you have to print H, then H would be 1, 2, 3, 4, and fifth element from the right. So we have to simply say minus 5 and we'll get H. Similarly, you can try the same thing for other data types like list and tuple. Next, we will quickly see what is index out of range. So as we already know, the index can go from 0 till the last element, which would be total length minus 1. So suppose we have this list, okay, and it has 3 elements, 1, 2, and 3. So total length is 3. Index of third element, which is 3, would be 2. So 1 will be index 0, 2 will be at index 1, 3 will be at index 2. Now suppose rather than giving 2 or anything less than 2, if we start give say 4, then we are going to get an error that this particular index, which is 4, is beyond the range. So it gives index error, which is list index out of range. So in this we have seen 3 things: that index always starts from 0, and the last element will always be total length minus 1. If you give a minus sign, then rather than counting from left, Python will start counting from the right. And minus 5 would be as good as total length of hello, which is 5, minus 5, which would be H, right? So it doesn't change. You give total length minus element, or you simply give minus element, the output remains the same. With that, now let's look into slicing.